Good morning. Welcome to Unity Longmont Spiritual Center on the 8th of October, 2023. I'm Dava Money. I'll be speaking today about Zen Buddhism, and Christina Hildebrandt is here with her harp Hester to provide music. Let's go with Christina. Thank you, Christina. It's beautiful. So it's at this time that we go into prayer by taking a breath together, being aware of ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our spirits. We rest into the truth of who we are as divine and human beings. We open our hearts and minds today, cheerful to be together, grateful for each breath and this beautiful day. May each and every moment of this service serve you. And so it is. Amen. And we'll hear from Christina. Wow, so celestial. Thank you, Christina. Absolutely gorgeous. So last week, we looked at the life of Buddha and some of his precepts and teachings in his longer than 40 years of teaching students and attracting disciples. We looked at the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. Today, we're going to look at some Zen teachings, especially those that have been taught by Thich Nhat Hanh. And we'll be looking at the 5 mindfulness trainings and how they help us to navigate through this life. And one of the things I have loved about Zen Buddhism, which I started studying back in the 70s, are koans. And they are brief little stories that kind of catch us off guard. So I have attached a koan to each of the principles, and we'll see what comes up for us. Starting in another direction first, Teilhard de Chardin was a paleontologist and a Jesuit priest, a very deep thinker. And he predicted that the next wave of consciousness would be a spiritual one, and that it would be a human evolution that would wrap the world in something he called noosphere, and that would be dominated by human consciousness and interpersonal relationships. And I believe it was Richard Rohr said, the internet, which makes a lot of sense to me. One of the things we'll be looking at today is how do we make the most of our life And how do we contribute positively to the noosphere? Harold Becker says, when we are in tune with our core essence, love flows easily in and around us. We know that is because our core essence is love. It's so important to remember that and to practice operating from that, making choices from that, choices about our own life and choices about how we interact with others. So again, I think that these principles can be very helpful. Thich Nhat Hanh said, these are the most concrete ways to practice mindfulness. We know how important mindfulness is, and that it is being able to be aware of what's going on in the moment within ourselves and around us. So much information that comes to us through our senses and through our intuition. So the purpose of these is to cultivate compassion and understanding, compassion for ourselves and others, and understanding. And so it's helpful, I think, to go back to the root of the word compassion, which means suffer with. We are aware that all of us suffer. We are aware that everyone suffers. So I find it interesting that each of the principles starts with the language of aware of the suffering. So the first training is about protecting life, protecting all forms of life, human, animal, plant, and mineral. The second is about social justice, how and what kind of role we can play in improving this world. It includes generosity and vowing not to steal or exploit other beings. The third is the practice of responsible sexual behavior. And the fourth is deep listening and loving speech. Deep listening and loving speech really emphasizes the importance of each word and each intention that we use. The fifth is about mindful consumption, where we agree not to bring toxins and poisons into our body and our mind. These are all principles that are based on the precepts that Buddha taught. And one of the things that he taught is when we refrain from doing one thing, we can prevent something else from happening. So think about gossip. If we keep ourselves from gossiping, we can prevent the spread of that toxicity by another person. So it's interesting to think about by refraining, by restraining ourselves, not only do we make something happen, but we can keep something else from happening. That's pretty powerful. So the 5 principles are a global spirituality and ethic, a code of ethics, how to live our life. And they're about transformation and happiness, and they bring out the insight of interbeing. If you know Thich Nhat Hanh, you know the word interbeing. It's very powerful. To me, it represents that anything and everything we do, including breathing, is impacting not just ourselves, but everyone else, because as we look at it in unity, we are all one. There's no way to separate ourselves from that except through illusion. So by practicing these, we're already on the path to become a bodhisattva. And the bodhisattva that I'm most aware of is Kuan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion. So again, much of what we want to do is cultivate compassion, being aware of suffering, our own and that of others, and alleviating it in many different ways. So the first is aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life. I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking or in my way of life. And in this moment, I am aware that Israel has just declared war, that our world is suffering. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world. So that is the first principle that one commits to and lives by. It includes a lot. It requires mindfulness to be aware of each thought we have, of each impulse we have, of each emotion we have. And it's doable. So the koan that I picked for this one is called Nothing Exists. Yamako Teshu, as a young student of Zen, visited one master after another, and he called upon Dokuan of Shokoku. Desiring to show his attainment, he said, the mind, Buddha, and sentient beings, after all, do not exist. They do not exist. The true nature of phenomena is emptiness. There is no realization, no delusion, no sage, no mediocrity. There's no giving and nothing to be received. Dokuan, who is smoking quietly, said nothing. Suddenly he whacked Yamaoka with his bamboo pipe. Whacked him. This made the youth quite angry. If nothing exists, inquired Dokuan, where did this anger come from? A reminder about the first principle, that our anger can be very dangerous. We will have anger. We are humans. And there are times that anger may be useful to us in our personal lives, helping us to make the right decision. But to fuel it is not going to serve anyone. So the second is true happiness. Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I am committed to practicing generosity. In my thinking, speaking, and acting, I am determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to another. And I will share my time, my energy, and material resources with those who are in need. I will practice looking deeply to see that this happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering. They're not separate. that true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion. We keep coming back to understanding and compassion. And that running after wealth, fame, power, and sensual pleasure can bring much suffering and despair. I am aware that happiness depends on my mental attitude and not on external conditions, and that I can live happily in the present moment simply by remembering I already have more than enough conditions to be happy. Simply by remembering I can be happy. I am committed to practicing right livelihood so that I can help reduce the suffering of living beings on Earth and stop contributing to climate change. See how appropriate and relevant these are to today. So the koan I chose for this is "The Moon Cannot Be Stolen." Ryokan, a Zen master, lived the simplest kind of life in a little hut at the foot of a mountain. One evening, a thief visited the hut only to discover there was nothing there to steal. It was an empty little hut. Ryokan returned and caught him, and he said, "You have come a long way to visit me. You have come a long way to visit me, and you should not return empty-handed. So please take my clothes as a gift." The thief was bewildered. He took the clothes and he left. Ryokan sat naked, watching the moon. Poor fellow, he mused. I wish I could have given him this beautiful moon. Generosity, giving to others. And generosity of mind. And principle number 3 is about true love. Again, this is something you commit by reading it and saying it over and over again. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. Knowing that sexual desire is not love, and that sexual activity motivated by craving and always harms myself as well as others when it's motivated by craving. I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without true love and a deep, long-term commitment made known to my family and friends. Made known to my family and friends. No secrets. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to protect couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct, like the betrayal of affairs. Seeing that body and mind are one, that's so important. I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and cultivate loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness. Those are the 4 basic elements of true love. Loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness. Goes back to that interbeing. Practicing true love, we know that we will continue beautifully into the future. So the koan for this is called Muddy Road. And you may have heard this, I think I've shared it before. A monk and his disciple were traveling together down a muddy road, and a heavy rain was still falling. And coming around a bend, they saw a lovely girl in a silk kimono and sash, and she was unable to cross the intersection. "Come on, girl," said the master, lifted her in his arms and carried her across the intersection. The student, the disciple, did not speak again until that night they arrived at a lodging temple. He couldn't restrain himself any longer, and he said, "We monks don't go near females." "What were you thinking? We don't go near females, especially young and lovely ones. They're dangerous. Why did you do that?" And the master said, "I left the girl there. You are still carrying her. You are still carrying her." How often do we, I know I certainly do, end up obsessing about something very unusefully? The fourth is loving speech and deep listening. This one is so important. And for me personally, it has taken a lot of practice to be able to hear someone without my mind forming my response while they're still talking. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and others among ethnic and religious groups and nations. So don't think small, right? Every interaction we have with one person is affecting the whole. Again, going back to that gossip example, if we share some nasty gossip with someone, they're inevitably going to share it with 3 more people, right? It has a ripple effect. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. Choosing our words carefully. When anger is manifesting in me, because it will, I am determined not to speak. So I'm determined to not let my anger propel me into words. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and to look more deeply into anger. So we don't ignore it. It's there. But we dive deep and figure it out. And we bring compassion to it. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and in the other person. I will speak and listen in a way that can help myself and the other person to transform suffering and see the way out of difficult situations. If we can do that, think of the effect it has. Think of the settling, the calming, the peacefulness of it. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain. Think about our world today and how much goes by news that is not true and incites strong responses in people. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness. We're back to understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness, the 4 parts of love, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep in my consciousness. In a few moments, I'm going to bring up some images I made to show us how this works. So the koan that I chose for this is probably very familiar to you. It is known as what is the sound of one hand clapping? The answer is not, although I played with that. The koan is actually 2 hands clap and there is a sound. But what is the sound of one hand? So this was used by the 18th century Zen master Hakuin Ekaku to catalyze a spiritual awakening. The actual meaning is really profound. It's a question that cannot be answered by our usual method, by thinking. You can't think to the answer. It's not logical, right? Which is true of all the koans. It can only be answered by non-thinking. What is non-thinking? It includes deep listening, not just listening to the question, but to our entire being, noticing how our entire self is responding to that question or whatever has come up. To learn to listen, not just with our ears, but with our eyes and our skin and our bones. Being completely receptive to the answer. Broadcasting nothing, putting nothing out. Being still and open. We have to quiet the body, the mouth, and the mind to do that. Our thoughts must be quiet. Quiet enough so that when a thought does come up, it makes a sound. And we let that go. So the fifth is nourishment and healing. And again, this is read out loud by the practitioner. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and all others. I will do so by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will practice looking deeply into how I consume the 4 kinds of nutriments: edible foods, sense impressions, volition, and consciousness. I'm determined not to gamble or to use alcohol, drugs, or any other products which contain toxins, such as certain websites, electronic games, TV programs, films, magazines, books, and conversations. I will practice coming back to the present moment to be in touch with the refreshing, healing, and nourishing elements in me and around me, not letting regrets or sorrow drag me back into the past, nor letting anxieties, fear, or craving pull me out of this present moment. I am determined not to try to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. Think about it for a moment. When we are craving something, isn't it to take our mind, our awareness off of that which needs attention? I will contemplate interbeing, there it is again, that inner being, and consume in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family, my society, and the earth. So this next koan is called Eating the Blame. Circumstances arose one day which delayed preparation of the dinner of a Soto Zen master, Fugai, and his followers. In haste, the cook went to the garden with his curved knife and cut off the tops of green vegetables, chopped them together, and made soup, unaware that in his haste he had included part of a snake. The followers of Fugai thought they had never tasted such great soup. But when the master himself found the snake's head in his bowl, he summoned the cook. "What is this?" he demanded, holding up the head of the snake. "Oh, thank you, master," replied the cook, taking the morsel and eating it quickly. Figure that one out. So again, a reminder that each of these principles begins with aware of the suffering. We can't escape awareness. We mustn't escape awareness of suffering. It must be dealt with. And we have the means, the tools, the skills that can be developed to do that. So I go back to Romans 12:2. Do not change yourselves to be like the people of this world, but be changed within by a new way of thinking. Then you will be able to decide what God wants for you. You will know what is good and pleasing to Him and what is perfect. To me, that says something about hope, opportunity, and responsibility. That we can be our best selves in this world with lots of hiccups, perhaps, picking ourselves up again and starting again. That's just part of being human, I think. But if we keep the North Star in mind, let's keep moving forward with it, individually, together. So I want to bring up these images that I created yesterday. It took me a few hours, so I hope they will serve you. So this was taught to me by An Hung Nguyen in our Sangha in Fairfax, Virginia, and she called it Buddhist psychology. So this circle represents ourself, and the top half, which is clear right now, is consciousness, the living room. It is everything we are aware of. The bottom half is called the unconsciousness. It's things we're not aware of, but are alive and happening. It's called the basement or the storehouse. This is where the stored seeds of consciousness are. We all have them. We're all born with them. Now, our seeds are all the same things, but some of them are different sizes. So someone might have an especially big something, a big anger. For someone else, their anger seed might be really little. So we have all these seeds and more, infinite number of seeds. And we have a seed of mindfulness. That's the hope. That's the salvation. So these seeds get activated. Let me show you the next one. So what happens is there may be an event, there may be a thought that triggers fear. All of a sudden, that seed is sprouting and it is growing and it comes up into the living room. And then maybe there's a little bit of joy and that sprouts and that comes up into the living room. And maybe there's sadness and that sprouts and it comes up into the living room. And look what is happening to the living room. It is no longer clear. It has gotten so smoky we can't see sometimes. And oftentimes in our own lives, It's when our living room gets murky enough that we begin to do something about it. And so the something about it that we can all do is to practice mindfulness. So every time that we are aware of the present moment, every time that we meditate, every time we take a breath in awareness, a step in awareness, we are stimulating the mindfulness seed. And it comes up into the living room. And look what it has done. It has cleared out the living room. What remains there right now is joy, love, and gratitude. That doesn't mean the living room won't get filled up again, because in the next instant, there might be another trigger. Sometimes when we become aware of our own sadness, aware of the suffering of the world, that sadness will get triggered and it will come up into the living room. And what we are to do with that is not try to repress it and push it back down into the basement, because we can't possibly do that. When we do that, the seed sprouts even more strongly and takes up more room in the living room. So what we do is we cultivate that mindfulness and we go back to that place in the living room where the sadness is there or anything else is there. And we feel compassion for it. And we have an awareness that my sadness is your sadness, is the world's sadness. So let me listen very deeply to this sadness. Let me witness it. And what we know when we do that, just like listening to any one person, there is a softening. The sadness softens. It begins to transform. The living room becomes more clear. There is still a seed of sadness. There is a seed for and of everything. There will always be that. We're human. But I invite you to consider today all of the tools at hand for dealing with our own suffering and the suffering of others, and how we can contribute to the noosphere. So it is, and we will hear from Christina. So magnificent. Thank you, Christina. Thank you. It's at this time that we go into our donation of love and light. We do so by taking a breath, being aware of our bodies, our minds, our spirits, and our essence of love. Being of love and light, we can choose to share it. We always have the choice to share it. Simply making that choice to allow this love and light to extend beyond ourselves, to be a part of the world, to be of the world. With this opportunity and all opportunities, we are grateful. So we thank you. And so it is. We will finish with Christina.